The ancient marble of the obsidian sanctum felt like ice against Isolde's torn cheek. Blood, dark, silver-laced Luna blood, pooled beneath her shattered ribs where Alpha King Kael's silver-threaded whip had marked her sentence. High above her on the high dais, Kael stood in his ceremonial black armor, his golden alpha eyes cold, stripped of every trace of the fierce devotion he had sworn to her under the crimson moon. "You betrayed the crown, Isolde." Kael's voice echoed through the silent, crowded hall like a bell tolling for the dead. "Your bloodline ends today." He turned his back, stepping down from the dais toward Lady Genevieve, leaving Isolde broken, bleeding, and publicly disgraced. He did not see the wax-sealed parchment she pressed into the herald's trembling hands, nor the fierce, unbroken fire in her eyes as she whispered her final message. The silence in the great hall of the Obsidian Citadel was heavier than the iron chains binding Isolde's wrists. Hundreds of pack nobles, elders, and foreign dignitaries lined the perimeter, their eyes filled with a terrifying mix of pity, satisfaction, and bloodlust. Beside the throne stood Elder Vane, the head of the High Council, his withered hands folded neatly over his ornate robes. Beside him was Lady Genevieve of House Ironwood, dressed in silk the color of fresh crushed berries, her gaze shining with triumphant satisfaction. "The evidence is indisputable," Elder Vane announced, his voice raspy, yet commanding enough to still the murmurs of the crowd. "Luna Isolde of the Silver Veil branch has colluded with our sworn enemies, the Blood-Fang Dominion. She deactivated the runic perimeter at the northern border, leading directly to the ambush that nearly cost Lord Malachor his life." Isolde forced herself to lift her chin. Every movement sent a searing lightning bolt of pain across her rib cage. The whip used on her was no ordinary leather. It was woven with sanctified silver, designed to suppress a werewolf's natural healing and leave excruciating, lingering burns. "I did not drop the northern wards, Elder Vane," Isolde said, her voice raspy, but firm enough to carry across the hall. "I adjusted the runic frequencies because the ancient array was collapsing from the inside. If I had not tethered the seal with my own vital energy, the Bloodfang packs would not have merely ambushed a patrol. They would be standing inside this sanctum right now." A soft, mocking chuckle escaped Genevieve's lips. "A convenient tale, Lady Isolde. Yet it was your personal seal found on the shattered wardstone, and it was your herbal tincture found in Lord Malachor's goblet prior to his collapse." Isolde looked past Genevieve, her gaze locking onto the man who held her heart and her fate in his hands. Alpha King Kael sat upon the throne of dark granite, his massive frame motionless. His sharp jawline was tight, his knuckles white where he gripped the sculpted arms of his seat. His wolf, a legendary shadow beast that had united 3 warring territories, was raging beneath his skin. Isolde could feel the tremors of his aura violently clashing against her own through the fragile, fraying threads of their mate bond. "Kael," she whispered, using his name instead of his title for the first time since the trial began. "Look at me. You know my heart. You know I would burn this entire world before I let harm come to you or your people." Kael did not look at her eyes. He stared rigidly at the bloody floor between them. "The evidence bears your mark, Isolde," Kael said, his tone devoid of warmth. "My brother lies in the apothecary quarters battling silver poisoning. The northern border has fallen. The council demands justice, and as king, I cannot let sentiment blind me to duty." "Duty?" Isolde let out a ragged, breathless laugh. "Is it duty that blinds you, Kael? Or is it fear of the council's judgment? Is it the quiet whisper of House Ironwood promising you political stability if you replace a disgraced bride with an obedient noble daughter?" A collective gasp echoed through the court. Genevieve's eyes narrowed sharply, while Elder Vane stepped forward, pointing a finger at Isolde. "Insolence! You stand condemned of high treason, yet you dare slander the crown!" Kael stood up. The sheer weight of his alpha aura slammed down upon the room like a physical hammer. Nobles bowed their heads instinctively. Even the guards stumbled back a step. "Enough," Kael commanded. He stepped down from the raised platform, his heavy boots clicking against the marble. He stopped barely 2 feet from where Isolde knelt in her ruined gown. The scent of rain, cedar, and ozone, his signature scent, engulfed her. making her soul ache with a terrible phantom longing. "By the laws of the Obsidian Realm," Kael said, his voice dropping to a gravelly register that only she could hear clearly. "Your title as Luna is revoked. You are stripped of pack standing, house ties, and royal protection." "Kael, please," she whispered, not begging for her life, but begging him to see the truth. "If you banish me now, you are walking directly into the trap they have laid for you." Kael did not answer. He turned to the captain of the Royal Guard. "Transport her to the Shadow Ridge. She is banished beyond the perimeter strip. If she steps back into Obsidian territory, she is to be executed on sight." He turned away. As he took his first step toward the high doors, leaving her alone in the pool of her own blood, Isolde reached out with her remaining strength. She did not reach for his cloak. Instead, she pressed a tightly rolled piece of thick, silver-bound parchment into the hands of Herald Orson, who stood shaking beside the dais. "Give this to the king when the eclipse reaches its zenith tonight," Isolde whispered to the herald, her dark eyes flashing with a haunting intensity. "Tell him it is my final message. If he has an ounce of the ruler he promised to be, he will read it before he signs my execution order." Kael walked out without looking back. As the heavy oak doors groaned shut behind him, Isolde was hauled up by iron-clad guards. She did not cry out as her torn skin stretched. She looked down at the pool of silver blood left on the marble floor. None of them realized that her blood had not spilt in vain. The moment her body touched the stone, the subtle runic arrays she had spent months carving into her bloodline activated beneath the palace floor, quietly sealing the citadel's core against an invisible threat that had already crossed their gates. The journey to the Shadow Ridge was designed to break whatever was left of a disgraced prisoner's spirit. Isolde was locked inside an iron cage wagon pulled by two armored draft horses. The wheels rattled over jagged mountain paths, each violent jolt tearing open the silver-inflicted wounds across her back and chest. Beside the wagon rode Captain Garrett, a veteran warrior with graying hair and a scarred jaw. Unlike the other guards who threw cold water or harsh words at Isolde, Garrett kept his gaze fixed on the dense pine forest around them, his hand resting tightly on the pommel of his broadsword. "Drink," Garrett said quietly, pausing beside a small window in the iron cage while the horses stopped at a stream crossing. He thrust a wooden canteen through the bars. Isolde dragged herself across the straw-covered floor, taking the canteen with trembling fingers. The water was icy, soothing her parched throat. "You risk much by showing kindness to a traitor, Captain." Garrett glanced back at the 6 guards trailing behind them before speaking in a low tone. "I fought alongside your father in the Ridge Wars, Lady Isolde. I know the blood of the Silver Veil. You may be proud, and you may be reckless with ancient magic, but you are no traitor. Something foul is brewing in the Citadel, and I fear the king is too surrounded by adders to see the venom in his own cup." Isolde took a slow, deliberate breath, fighting the dizziness that threatened to consume her. "The poison in Malakor's cup was real, Captain, but I did not put it there. Malakor drank it himself." Garrett's eyes widened slightly. "Lord Malakor poisoned himself? Why would the king's own half-brother risk his life?" "Because he knew Kael's greatest weakness," Isolde said, her eyes burning with sharp intelligence. "Kael lost his mother to silver poisoning when he was a boy. He carries a deep, unyielding guilt over her death. The moment Malakor showed the exact same symptoms, Kael stopped thinking like an Alpha King and started reacting like a traumatized child, trying to save his remaining family. Malakor didn't need to kill himself. He only needed to make it look like someone inside the inner circle was targeting the royal bloodline." Before Garrett could respond, a horn blew from the front of the convoy. "Keep moving," the lead guard shouted. "We must reach the ridge border before dark." Meanwhile, 50 leagues away in the high tower of the Obsidian Citadel, Alpha King Kael stood before the massive stained glass window of his private study. The sun was sinking fast, casting long, bloody streaks of orange and purple across the sky. The eclipse was scheduled to reach its peak within the hour. Kael pressed his palm against his chest. Beneath his ribs, the mate bond was clawing at him like an enraged, wounded beast. He could feel Isolde's physical agony, the bone-deep chill of the mountain air, The fire of silver burns, the lingering exhaustion of her drained magic. It was taking every ounce of his legendary willpower not to tear down the stone walls, shift into his shadow wolf, and run across the mountains to drag her back into his arms. She betrayed the realm, he told himself savagely, forcing the thought down into his soul. The evidence was clear. Her seal was on the broken wardstone. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Lord Malachor entered the room, leaning heavily on a cane, his face pale and drawn. "Brother," Malachor said softly, stepping toward the hearth. "You should be resting. The council is pressing for the formal ratification of your union with Lady Genevieve. House Ironwood will not deploy their eastern legions to reinforce our broken border until the marriage contract is signed." Kael didn't turn around. "Isolde has barely reached the border, Malachor, and already you speak of a new bride?" "I speak of survival, Kael." Malachor's voice carried a sharp edge of urgency. "The Bloodfang packs are gathering at the perimeter. Isolde's treason left us defenseless. If we do not secure Ironwood's troops tonight, the entire Eastern Valley will burn." Kael's jaw clenched. He turned slowly, his golden eyes fixing on his half-brother with a predatory intensity that made Malachor step back. "Leave me, Malachor. I will make my decision when the eclipse passes." Reluctantly, Malachor bowed and backed out of the chamber. Once the heavy door clicked shut, Harold Orson stepped out from the shadows near the corner bookcase. The old man was trembling, holding a small silver cylinder bound with a dark red wax seal. "Your Majesty," Orson quavered, before she was taken away, "Lady Isolde commanded me to give this to you at the zenith of the eclipse. She said you must read it before you sign any document." Kael stared at the cylinder. The wax seal bore the mark of the silver veil, a crescent moon entwined with a blade. "Give it here," Kael growled. He took the cylinder. The moment his fingers brushed the parchment, a sharp jolt of raw magic surged through his veins. It was a blood-rune seal, bound by Isolde's very life force. It could only be opened by two forces: her death or the explicit submission of Kael's alpha spark to the rune. Setting his mouth into a hard line, Kael summoned a drop of his own fire-imbued alpha aura, pressing his thumb onto the wax. The wax melted into glowing red sparks. The parchment unrolled itself, hovering in the air before him. Instead of written words, the parchment projected a translucent, ethereal memory phantom into the center of the dark room. A magical recording captured by Isolde's blood-bound scrying stones. Kael's breath caught in his throat as the phantom vision flickered to life. In the projection, Lord Malachor stood inside the secret alchemy chamber beneath the citadel. He was not weak or ailing. He was laughing softly as he poured a small vial of gray powder into a cup of wine, the exact powder that caused non-lethal temporary silver fever. Standing beside him was Lady Genevieve, holding a forged iron stamp, the identical replica of Isolde's personal Luna seal. "Once Kael sees her seal on the broken wardstone," Genevieve's voice echoed clearly through the phantom projection, "he will have no choice. His pride and his duty will force him to cast her out. And once the Silver Veil bloodline is stripped of protection, the vault beneath the sanctum will finally be ours to open." The projection dissolved into dust, leaving the dark room in dead silence. Kael stood frozen, his eyes wide, his heart hammering against his chest like a battering ram. The parchment dropped into his hands, revealing a single line of Isolde's handwriting penned at the bottom. "They did not break the wards to let the Bloodfangs in, Kael. They broke the wards to draw you away from the sanctum floor. The true threat was never outside our walls. It is already sitting at your table." A cold sweat broke out across Kael's forehead as the full, devastating reality of his mistake crashed down upon him. He hadn't protected his kingdom. He had been manipulated, weaponized, and used by his own brother and council to destroy the only person who stood between the realm and total annihilation. "Guards!" Kael roared, his voice shaking the stone walls of the tower. The heavy doors flew open instantly, and 4 royal guards rushed into the study, swords drawn. Behind them came Elder Vane, his eyes sharp with sudden suspicion. "Your Majesty!" Vane exclaimed, looking from Kael's furious expression to the glowing embers of the blood scroll on the table. "What has happened? Is there news from the border?" "Seize Lord Malachor and Lady Genevieve immediately," Kael commanded, his alpha aura flaring so brightly that the glass lanterns along the wall shattered simultaneously. "Lock them in the deep dungeons under heavy guard. If either of them attempts to leave the citadel, execute them." Elder Vane's face paled, but he quickly masked it with a stern, authoritative frown. "Sire, you cannot simply arrest the leader of House Ironwood and your own brother based on a whim. The council will not stand for—" Before Vane could finish his sentence, Kael was across the room. His hand closed around the elder's throat, lifting the noble 6 inches off the floor. "I am the Alpha King," Kael snarled, his eyes burning with lethal gold, his voice vibrating with pure rage. "I am the law of this land. If I discover your hand was in this conspiracy, Vane, I will personally tear your heart from your chest and feed it to the crows." He slammed Vane into the stone wall, leaving the elder gasping for air, and turned to his commander. "Prepare my war stallion. I am riding to the Shadow Ridge." "Sire," the commander hesitated. "The eclipse is at its height. The mountain pass is pitch black, and the Blood Fang packs are active along the ridge. It is too dangerous." "I don't care if the underworld opens beneath my feet," Kael roared, grabbing his dark cloak and heavy blade. "I am bringing my Luna home." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small gilded fire messenger falcon, a rare, magically bound bird capable of carrying a fire-written message across vast distances in minutes. With shaking hands, Kael pricked his finger, letting his blood write a message onto the bird's golden chest. "Isolde, I was blind. The truth has been revealed. Fight, my love. Stay alive. I am coming for you, and I will burn the world to bring you back." He thrust his hand out the window, releasing the fire falcon into the night sky. The magical bird burst into a streak of crimson flame, shooting across the mountain peaks like a falling star. Meanwhile, at the narrow mountain pass leading to the Shadow Ridge, the air grew thick with the smell of wet iron and blood. The iron cage wagon had been forced off the road, its wooden wheels splintered against a massive boulder. Around the wreck, 4 of the 6 royal guards lay dead, their armor pierced by black-feathered arrows. Captain Garrett stood near the broken rear doors of the wagon, his broadsword dripping with dark blood. Beside him, crouching behind a fallen timber with a heavy guard crossbow in her hands, was Isolde. Despite her raw wounds and weakened frame, she was not hiding. Her dark eyes were sharp, scanning the shadows of the pine trees where shadowy wolf shapes moved silently through the fog. "They aren't Bloodfang raiders, Captain," Isolde muttered, pulling back the heavy iron string of the crossbow with her bare, bloodied hands, setting a steel bolt in place. "Look at their armor under those cloaks. That is refined steel from the ironwood foundries." Garrett spat blood onto the snow. "Genevieve sent an assassination squad to make sure you never reached the exile zone. She wanted to ensure I couldn't return when Kael inevitably discovered the truth," Isolde said coldly. A massive, iron-armored rogue wolf leaped from the high rock above them, its jaws snapping toward Garrett's throat. Garrett swung his broadsword with a harsh war cry, cleaving the beast's side, but 2 more shadow shapes lunged from the brush. Isolde didn't hesitate. She pulled the trigger. The steel bolt sped through the air, piercing the eye of the lead assassin wolf. Without missing a beat, she grabbed a broadsword from a fallen guard's hand, stepping up beside Garrett. Her physical body was broken, her silver burns screaming in agony with every breath. But her mind was calculating, cold, and lethal. She knew the layout of this pass better than anyone. "Garrett, the rock overhang above the narrow ledge," Isolde shouted, dodging a sweeping claw from an incoming assassin. "Cut the support ropes for the timber stack." Garrett realized her plan instantly. He lunged toward the ledge, his heavy blade slicing through the thick hemp ropes holding a stack of harvested mountain logs. With a deafening roar, dozens of massive pine trunks cascaded down the steep incline, crushing 3 of the remaining 4 assassins beneath an avalanche of timber and rock. The surviving assassin, a high-ranking ironwood mercenary in human form, stumbled backward, his leg pinned under a log. Isolde walked up to him, the point of her bloody sword resting against his throat. "Tell Genevieve," Isolde said, her voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "That if she wants me dead, she will have to come down into the dark herself." Before she could finish the mercenary off, a brilliant streak of crimson light shot through the dark sky above. The golden fire messenger falcon swooped down, hovering above the bloody battlefield before alighting on a splintered piece of the iron wagon. Isolde's heart gave a violent shudder. She recognized Kael's personal magical mark instantly. The fire falcon dissolved into a floating script of golden light, projecting Kael's desperate words into the cold night air. "Isolde, I was blind. The truth has been revealed. Fight, my love. Stay alive. I am coming for you, and I will burn the world to bring you back." Isolde stared at the floating words. For months, she had dreamed of hearing him say those words. She had dreamed of the moment he would realize her loyalty, her love, and her sacrifice. But as she stood in the freezing mud, surrounded by the corpses of men who had tried to murder her on his orders, the warmth in her chest did not ignite. Instead, a deep, icy void took its place. "He was blind," she murmured softly, her voice echoing in the quiet canyon. "He was blind because he chose not to see." She unclasped the heavy silver Luna ring from her right thumb, the ring Kael had given her on the night of their mating ceremony. She pressed the ring into the soft stone wall of the canyon cliff, carving a short, final message directly beneath Kael's floating golden script. Garrett limped over, wiping his bloody brow. "Lady Isolde, the king is on his way. He has realized the truth. If we wait here—" "If I return with him now, Captain," Isolde cut him off, her eyes shining with cold determination. "I return as a spared victim, a forgiven outcast waiting for his next mistake. I will not live in the shadows of his court, constantly proving my innocence to a man whose trust vanishes at the first sign of pressure." She stepped away from the wreckage, turning her back on the road to the citadel, and walked straight toward the deep, lawless abyss of the Bloodfang territory. "Where are you going?" Garrett asked, his voice filled with worry. "To complete the work I started," Isolde said without turning around. "To destroy the threat beneath the citadel from the outside." An hour later, Kael's warhorse tore through the fog, lathered in white foam and blood. Kael leaped from his saddle before the horse had even stopped, his golden eyes sweeping across the carnage at the mountain pass. He saw the crushed wagon, the dead assassins, and the fallen timber. Then his eyes landed on the rock wall. His fire messenger bird lay dead on a nearby stone, its magical spark exhausted. Resting on a flat rock beside it was Isolde's silver Luna ring, coated in dried blood. Above the ring, carved deep into the granite face of the cliff with the point of a blade, were Isolde's final words to her king. "Do not follow me, Kael. The king I loved died today on the marble floor of your sanctum. The woman you discarded will not be waiting for his ghost." Kael fell to his knees in the cold snow, clutching her silver ring to his chest as a soundless, heartbroken roar tore from his throat into the empty night. The iron-tinted pine forests of the Bloodfang Dominion were shrouded in perpetual twilight. Snow drifted lazily through the needles, dusting the mud where Isolde collapsed against the root of an ancient oak. Every breath felt like breathing broken glass. The silver-laced whip wounds across her ribs burned with an unholy heat. But deeper than the physical agony was the silent, thrumming pull in her pulse. The runic seal she had tied to her own blood beneath the obsidian sanctum was draining her vital energy minute by minute, keeping the citadel safe from afar while slowly wearing her life away. "Lady Isolde, rest," Captain Garrett urged, kneeling beside her in the snow and wrapping his thick wool cloak around her shivering shoulders. "We have crossed the border strip. The royal guards will not follow us here." "The guards won't," Isolde said, her lips pale, her dark eyes flashing with sharp intelligence despite her exhaustion. "But Genevieve's reach goes beyond royal orders, and the Bloodfangs do not welcome trespassing Lunas." Before Garrett could draw his sword, the brush around them rustled. 4 massive shapeshifters stepped out from the shadows of the trees, their amber eyes glowing in the gloom. They wore dark leather armor reinforced with iron studs, carrying heavy hunting spears. At their head stepped a tall warrior with braided dark hair, a jagged scar running across his throat, and a heavy mantle of black wolf fur over his broad shoulders. Lord Valen, Supreme Commander of the Blood-Fang Dominion. Well, well. Valen's voice was a low, dangerous growl that vibrated through the cold air. The disgraced Luna of the Obsidian Citadel, abandoned in my woods like discarded rubbish. I heard the Alpha King whipped you and threw you to the wolves, literally it seems. Garrett stepped in front of Isolde, his sword raised, but Isolde reached out, placing a soft, blood-stained hand on the captain's forearm, forcing him to lower his blade. I am no longer the Luna of Obsidian, Lord Valen, Isolde said, standing up with painful, deliberate grace. She did not bow her head. She held his fierce gaze directly. And I am not here as a beggar. Valen raised an eyebrow, amused by her audacity. You stand in my territory, bleeding out from silver burns, accompanied by a single broken guardsman. You have no rank, no pack, and no army. What could you possibly offer the Blood-Fang Dominion? The truth, Isolde replied clearly, and the key to your survival. Valen narrowed his eyes. Explain before I let my warriors test the edge of their spears. You were blamed for the ambush on Lord Malachor, Isolde said, taking a step toward the warlord. The Citadel Court believes your border raiders deactivated the northern wards and poisoned the king's brother to provoke a war. But you didn't order that attack, did you? A heavy silence settled over the forest. Valen's jaw tightened. My warriors fought a patrol at the border 3 days ago, but we never touched Malachor, nor did we touch the runic ward stones. The Obsidian Council declared war on us based on lies. Not lies, a setup, Isolde countered. Lord Malachor poisoned himself. Lady Genevieve forged my seal on the ward stones. The Council wanted a war with the Blood-Fang Dominion to justify raising tax levies and deploying Ironwood legions into the capital. They used your reputation as savages to cover their own coup. Valen stared at her, evaluating the absolute certainty in her eyes. Why tell me this? Kael cast you out. Why not let us burn his kingdom to the ground? Because the dark magic they released to break those wards wasn't just physical, Isolde said, her voice dropping to a serious tone. It unlocked an ancient shadow conduit beneath the Citadel's core. If that conduit opens completely, it won't just destroy the Obsidian Realm. It will corrupt every packed territory within 100 leagues, including yours. Valen looked at her bleeding hands, realizing the silver-threaded magic thrumming around her skin was holding something massive at bay. You bound the core wards to your own bloodline, Valen realized softly, his warrior persona giving way to quiet shock. Even after he stripped your rank and condemned you, you saved his people. I saved the innocent people, Isolde corrected coldly. Kael can burn in the fires of his own pride for all I care. But I will not let the Council sacrifice this realm for power. Valen studied her for a long moment before sheathing his blade. You have your father's iron spirit, Isolde of the Silver Veil. Come, my healers will treat your wounds, but if you are playing a game with my pack, not even your blood magic will save you. Chapter 5. The Reckoning of the King. Back in the Great Hall of the Obsidian Citadel, the atmosphere was suffocating. Alpha King Kael walked through the high double doors, his heavy black cloak trailing behind him, covered in mountain snow and dry mud. His shadow wolf aura slammed into the hall with terrifying force, causing decorative glass panels along the pillars to crack. The court nobles, gathered for an emergency council session, fell dead silent. At the front of the hall, Elder Vane stood beside Lady Genevieve and Lord Malachor. Genevieve was dressed in silk, smiling softly as if preparing to assume her place as the new candidate for Luna, while Malachor sat in a velvet armchair, playing the part of a recovering victim. Your Majesty, Elder Vane called out, trying to maintain an air of authority. We received reports that you rode out into the night toward the Shadow Ridge. The Council was deeply concerned for your safety. Silence, Kael growled. The single word resonated with enough alpha command to make several younger nobles drop to their knees. Kael walked straight up the marble aisle, stopping directly before the dais. He did not look at the throne. He looked at Malachor and Genevieve. Brother, Kael said softly, his voice dangerously smooth. How feels your throat? Is the silver fever subsiding? Malachor coughed weakly, holding a silk handkerchief to his mouth. "It is a slow recovery, Kael. The poison Luna Isolde used was cruel, but with time, I will heal." "A tragic story," Kael said. He reached into his tunic and pulled out a small crystal scrying orb, the twin to the blood scroll Isolde had left him. With a flick of his wrist, Kael threw the orb onto the marble floor. It shattered into a burst of blue light, projecting the memory phantom high into the vaulted ceiling of the hall for every noble, guard, and elder to see. The hall gasped in collective horror. High above them, giant floating images showed Lord Malachor laughing as he mixed the non-lethal silver powder into his own wine, while Lady Genevieve stamped the forged Luna seal onto a replica ward stone. Genevieve's face drained of all color. She took a frantic step backward, her eyes wide with panic. That is dark magic, a trick created by the traitor Isolde to turn you against your family." "Isolde's blood sealed that memory," Kael snapped, taking a menacing step toward Genevieve. "Blood magic cannot lie, Genevieve. It reflects the soul of the bearer." "Kael, listen to me." Malachor stood up, dropping his cane, his weak act completely vanishing. "I did it for House Obsidian. You were weak. You let that Silver Veil witch control your decisions. She refused to let us tap the power beneath the sanctum, power that could make our kingdom invincible." "She refused because that power is a curse," Kael roared, his fist striking Malachor across the face with enough force to send his half-brother crashing down the marble stairs. Guards immediately rushed forward, binding Malachor's hands in heavy iron suppression chains. Genevieve tried to slip into the crowd, but 2 royal guards blocked her path with drawn swords, forcing her to her knees. Kael turned his lethal gaze onto Elder Vane. The old man was pale, trembling, but his eyes held a desperate, bitter defiance. "And you, Vane," Kael said, leaning down into the elder's face. "You knew." "I did what was necessary for political stability," Vane spat out, dropping his polite facade. "House Ironwood offered 5,000 troops. Isolde offered nothing but ancient superstitions. You chose a girl over the survival of your crown." "I chose a woman who bled for this realm while you sold it piece by piece," Kael shouted, his voice echoing into the high rafters. He raised his hand to order Vane's arrest, but suddenly a deep, resonant rumble shook the entire citadel. The heavy marble floor beneath their feet cracked open. Bright, blood-red light surged up through the fissures, illuminating the great hall in an eerie, ominous crimson glow. The ancient runic symbols carved into the stone floor began to flicker erratically, pulsing like a dying heartbeat. A guard rushed into the hall, breathless and terrified. "Your Majesty! The core vault beneath the sanctum! The seal is destabilizing!" Kael's heart froze. He looked down at the pulsing red light, recognizing the distinct frequency of Isolde's soul magic. The seal wasn't failing because of a physical attack. It was failing because Isolde's physical body was weakening. Her life force was fading under the strain of her untreated silver wounds and the harsh mountain cold. If her heartbeat stops, Kael realized, his voice trembling with horror, the seal breaks entirely. He didn't care about the council. He didn't care about the throne. He turned toward the exit, his shadow wolf howling in agonizing despair inside his mind. "Sire," the captain of the guard called out. "Where are you going? The council needs to be restructured. The Ironwood army is marching toward our borders." "Let them march," Kael roared over his shoulder, sprinting toward the courtyard. "If I do not find Isolde and save her life, there won't be a kingdom left for anyone to rule." Chapter 6. Across enemy lines, the storm over the Bloodfang Mountains was fierce, howling with icy winds that tore through the mountain passes. Deep inside the stone fortress of the Bloodfang Dominion, Isolde lay on a fur-lined cot inside a subterranean chamber. Lord Valen's senior herbalist, an old woman named Muna, worked feverishly, applying soothing green moss and crushed moon herbs to the deep silver burns across Isolde's back. "She is stubborn," Muna grumbled, wiping sweat from her wrinkled brow as Valen walked into the room. "The silver poison in her blood is severe, but what is truly killing her is that magical link she maintains. Her soul is anchored to something far away, pouring her vital energy into a black hole." Isolde opened her eyes, her lips pale, but her dark gaze remained sharp as flint. If I sever the link, the obsidian core explodes. Half your territory will be swallowed by shadow. Valen leaned against the stone doorframe, crossing his arms. You are dying for a kingdom that threw you out, Isolde. That isn't bravery. It's madness. It's responsibility, Isolde whispered, forcing herself to sit up despite Muna's protests. My ancestors created the Silver Veil Wards. It is my blood's duty to protect the land, regardless of who sits on the throne. Before Valen could respond, a horn blew from the watchtowers high above the fortress. 3 short, sharp blasts, signaling an incoming intruder. A scout burst into the chamber, panting. Lord Valen, a single rider has breached the outer perimeter gate. He tore through our forward sentries without drawing a blade. He's using raw alpha aura. Isolde's heart gave a sudden, violent throb. The mate bond, ragged and scarred as it was, vibrated wildly inside her chest. Kael, how many troops is he bringing? Valen demanded, grabbing his broadsword. None, my lord, the scout reported. He came alone. Moments later, the heavy oak doors of the fortress courtyard were slammed open. Alpha King Kael stepped into the snow-covered courtyard of the Bloodfang stronghold. His black armor was covered in frost, his golden eyes glowing with desperate intensity. Dozens of Bloodfang warriors surrounded him, spears pointed at his chest, but Kael didn't even look at them. His gaze was fixed on the inner stone tower. Isolde! Kael's voice boomed across the fortress, raw with emotion, carrying a painful mix of authority and unbearable grief. Isolde, hear me! Valen stepped out onto the courtyard balcony, with Isolde walking slowly behind him, wrapped in a dark woolen cloak. When Kael's eyes locked onto Isolde, his breath hitched. He saw her pale skin, the dark shadows beneath her eyes, and the weak tremor in her hands. The sight cut deeper than any blade ever could. Isolde. Kael took a step forward, dropping his sword to the snow-covered cobblestones, a complete, unconditional sign of surrender from an Alpha King in enemy territory. Please, the Bloodfang warriors gasped in shock. An Alpha King never disarmed himself before an rival warlord. Isolde looked down at him from the balcony, her expression unreadable. You shouldn't have come, Kael. I gave you my answer on the cliff. I know what I did, Kael shouted, his voice cracking with emotion, tears threatening to break through his fierce gold eyes. I let my grief and my blind duty turn me into a monster. I listened to snakes and condemned the only soul who ever truly loved me. I don't ask for your forgiveness, Isolde. I ask for your life. Let me help you break the seal. Let me bear the burden of the magic with you. It is too late for regret, Kael, Isolde said softly, her voice carrying clearly through the crisp mountain air. You didn't trust me when I stood beside you in honor. You don't get to save me now just to ease your own guilt. Kael fell to one knee in the snow, looking up at her with raw, unshielded vulnerability. Then kill me. Take my life force to sustain the wards. But do not die in the dark, Isolde. I cannot live in a world where my hands caused your end. Before Isolde could answer, a high-pitched whistling sound pierced the sky. Thwack! A heavy black iron bolt slammed into the courtyard wall barely inches from Kael's head. From the tree line surrounding the Bloodfang fortress, hundreds of armored soldiers emerged from the shadows. Not Bloodfang, and not Obsidian royal guards. They wore the silver and black crest of House Ironwood, accompanied by elite mercenary war-bound shifters carrying heavy siege crossbows. At their head rode Elder Vane, riding an armored warhorse, holding a dark runic staff that hummed with forbidden shadow magic. How touching! Vane's voice echoed across the canyon, filled with malicious triumph. The foolish king abandons his kingdom for a dying mate, leading himself straight into our trap. Valen drew his sword instantly. Ironwood mercenaries, they bypassed our border patrols. They didn't bypass them. Vane opened the northern gates. Kael growled, standing up and retrieving his sword from the snow, his eyes flashing with lethal fury as he backed toward the fortress stairs to cover Isolde. Elder Vane raised his runic staff, pointing it at the fortress balcony. Kill the Alpha King. Kill the Silver Veil Witch. Once both bloodlines are extinguished, House Ironwood will claim the Sanctum Core and rule the three realms. A hail of black arrows rained down upon the fortress as the mercenary army charged the gates. The snow-choked valley around the Bloodfang fortress erupted into chaotic violence. Ironwood crossbow bolts rained down upon the granite battlements like a hail of dark needles, snapping stone and splitting timber. In the courtyard below, Alpha King Kael stood like a titan amidst the carnage. His shadow wolf aura pulsed around him in waves of translucent violet energy, deflecting incoming arrows and throwing back the first wave of mercenary line breakers. Beside him, Lord Valen fought with brutal, fluid precision, his broadsword severing iron spears and turning the narrow choke points of the courtyard into an impenetrable wall of steel. Yet high on the ridge above them, Elder Vane stood unfazed. He held his dark runic staff aloft, its black crystal tip pulsing in sync with the subterranean tremors shaking the earth. "He's not just attacking," Isolde called down from the balcony, her voice piercing the roar of battle as she leaned heavily against the stone balustrade. "Look at the frequency of his magic. Vane is using the staff as an anchor. He is siphoning energy from the Citadel's broken vault directly through my blood link." Kael looked up, his golden eyes widening in realization. "He's using your life force to power his shadow magic. Every spell he casts pulls another second of life from her heart," Valen growled, slicing down an Ironwood officer who had breached the inner gate. "If we do not cut down that old vulture, she won't survive the hour." "Hold the courtyard," Kael ordered Valen, his voice ringing with absolute alpha command. "I am going up the ridge." "Kael, wait," Isolde called out, but Kael was already moving. He did not attempt to navigate the winding stairs or safer defensive paths. Kael leapt onto the outer courtyard wall, his shadow wolf claws digging into the frost-slicked stone as he scaled the sheer cliff face toward Elder Vane. From his high vantage point, Vane saw the Alpha King ascending. A dark, mocking smile spread across the old man's face. He turned his staff toward Kael, channeling a concentrated beam of black, silver-laced lightning. "You were always too rash, Kael," Vane shouted over the howling wind. "You let your grief blind you when your mother died. You let your pride blind you when your bride was accused. And now you let your passion blind you as your kingdom burns." The beam of dark magic struck Kael squarely in the chest. A agonizing roar tore from Kael's throat as the sanctified silver energy burned into his flesh, blackening his armor and searing his lungs. But Kael did not fall. He dug his boots into the narrow rock ledge, taking another agonizing step forward, his golden eyes fixed on the man who had torn his life apart. "I was blind, Vane." Kael spat out through blood-stained teeth, his muscles trembling under the sheer strain of the dark spell. "But my eyes are open now." Below, Isolde watched in horror as Kael took the brunt of the dark strike. She could feel the agony radiating through their frayed mate bond, the searing heat of the silver, the agonizing tear of shadow magic breaking his bones. He was taking a strike meant to annihilate an entire legion, standing as a physical shield between Vane's malice and her fragile life. "He is dying for me," Isolde realized, her breath catching in her throat. "He isn't fighting for his crown or his legacy. He is fighting to buy me a single breath of air." Gathering every remaining spark of her Silver Veil heritage, Isolde pressed her bloodied palms into the stone floor of the balcony. She closed her eyes, ignoring the excruciating pain in her ribs, and began to chant the ancient inverse incantation of her bloodline. Instead of pouring her energy into defending the distant citadel, she reversed the flow of the blood rune. She pulled the energy back into her own body, severing Vane's siphon in a sudden, violent burst of magic. On the ridge, Vane's staff violently backfired. The black crystal atop the staff burst into shards of blinding white light. The unexpected shockwave shattered Vane's defensive barrier, throwing the old elder off his feet and sending him crashing against the sharp mountain rocks. Kael seized the moment. With a final desperate surge of speed, he closed the distance, his broadsword coming down with relentless force, shattering Vane's runic staff into dust. Vane lay pinned against the snow, his robes torn, coughing blood as Kael hovered over him like an avenging shadow. It is too late." Vayne wheezed, staring up at Kael with bitter defiance. The rift is open. The core beneath the sanctum is collapsing. Even if you kill me, your kingdom dies today. Kael raised his blade, his face an unreadable mask of cold, unrelenting judgment. Then my kingdom dies in truth, but you will not live to see it. With a single decisive stroke, Kael ended the traitor's life. Though Elder Vayne lay dead and the Ironwood mercenaries broke rank and fled back into the mountain fog, no victory cheers echoed across the Bloodfang stronghold. The sky above the mountain range had turned a terrifying, bruised shade of deep purple. Beneath their feet, the earth vibrated with a low, unnatural hum that made the stone walls crack and weep dust. The shadow conduit beneath the distant citadel was breaking free of its ancient seals. Kael stumbled down the mountain path, his heavy armor cracked, his chest bleeding from the silver burns Vayne had inflicted upon him. He collapsed through the inner gates of the fortress, dropping to one knee in the snow near the inner courtyard. Isolde rushed down the stone stairs, supported by Captain Garrett. When she reached Kael, she dropped to her knees beside him, her dark eyes wide with shock as she took in the state of his wounds. "Kael, you fool," she whispered, her voice trembling as her hands hovered over his charred chest armor. "You took enough silver magic to kill 3 alpha wolves." Kael looked up at her, his golden eyes dimming, yet filled with a quiet, profound clarity he had never possessed on his throne. He reached up with a bloodied hand, gently cupping her cheek, his thumb brushing away a trail of dark dust from her skin. "I took what I deserved," Kael said softly, every word a visible struggle. "The core, it's pulling on your soul, Isolde. I can feel it through the bond. It's dragging you into the deep dark with it." "The seal was anchored to my blood," Isolde said, tears finally spilling over her lashes. "When Vayne tampered with the array, he tied the core's collapse directly to my heartbeat. To close the rift permanently, the anchor must be severed." Valen stepped forward, his sword lowered, his face grim. "If the anchor is severed, the silver veil line ends. You die, Isolde." "No," Kael said firmly, standing up with agonizing slowness, pushing past the pain that threatened to tear his body apart. "There is another way." Isolde looked at him, startled. "Kael, no, you don't know what you're saying." "The mate bond," Kael said, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. "The ancient laws of the First Pact state that a mate bond is not just a union of hearts. It is a bridge of souls, a shared vessel." "Kael, stop!" Isolde's voice cracked with panic as she realized his intention. "If you try to transfer the anchor to yourself, your body is already too weakened by silver poison. It will destroy your wolf. It will strip you of your alpha aura forever." Kael smiled, a gentle, heartbreaking smile that transformed his fierce, battle-hardened face. "For months I believed being an alpha meant holding power over others," Kael murmured, taking her trembling hands into his own. "I thought duty meant preserving my crown at all costs, but my crown was worthless without you beside me. I gave you wounds that may never heal, Isolde. Let me give you back your life." Before Isolde could pull away, Kael pressed his forehead against hers. He activated the most ancient sacred rite of the Alpha lineage, the rite of absolute transfer. A blinding column of crimson and gold light erupted from where they stood, shooting high into the stormy sky. Isolde gasped as a sensation of weightlessness washed over her. The crushing, suffocating weight that had been pressing down on her chest for days, the agonizing drain of her vital magic, was suddenly lifted. The black marks of the silver poison on her skin began to fade, replaced by a warm, radiant silver glow. Across the link, she felt Kael absorb the massive, dark corruption of the shadow conduit into his own soul. She felt his shadow wolf roar in agonizing sacrifice, wrapping its mighty form around the dark entity beneath the citadel, crushing the shadow conduit in a final, heroic embrace before falling silent. 50 leagues away, the blood-red glow beneath the obsidian sanctum flared once, then permanently extinguished. The ancient floor settled. The core was sealed forever. In the Bloodfang courtyard, The brilliant light faded. Kael collapsed into the snow like a fallen oak. His eyes were closed, his breathing faint and shallow, his golden alpha aura entirely gone. The fierce, terrifying shadow beast that had ruled the three realms was quiet, leaving behind only a broken, bleeding man who had given everything to save the woman he loved. Isolde knelt beside him, clutching his cold hands to her chest, weeping softly as the icy mountain wind howled around them. 3 months later, the great hall of the Obsidian Citadel had been transformed. The dark granite throne that had once symbolized absolute, unquestioned alpha authority was gone, replaced by a simple, wide council table crafted from polished ironwood and white marble. The hall was packed with representatives from every major pack across the three realms: Obsidian nobles, Bloodfang warriors, and reformed ironwood delegates. At the head of the chamber stood Isolde. She was dressed in an elegant gown of dark silver silk, her dark hair braided with winter flowers. She bore no scars on her face, though the quiet, formidable intelligence in her eyes commanded more respect than any royal title ever could. Standing beside her was Captain Garrett, now named High Commander of the Realm's Guard. The heavy double doors of the hall swung open. Kael walked down the marble aisle alone. He wore simple black leather armor, free of royal crests or gold embroidery. He walked with a slight limp, his physical strength recovered, though his alpha aura remained quiet, a permanent reminder of the sacrifice he had made to seal the dark core. The court held its breath as Kael stopped before the main dais. He did not sit at the table. He stood before Isolde, bowing his head in quiet respect. "The trial of the conspirators is complete," Kael announced, his voice steady and calm. "Lord Malachor and Lady Genevieve have been stripped of all lands and sentenced to life imprisonment in the northern mines. House Ironwood's corrupt leadership has been dissolved, and their eastern territories placed under joint council protection." Isolde looked down at him, her expression calm and measured. "And what of the crown, Kael?" Kael reached into his cloak and withdrew the ancient, dragon-forged obsidian crown, the symbol of absolute rule that had governed the realm for 10 generations. He did not place it on his own head. Instead, he placed it gently onto the center of the marble table. "The time of absolute alpha rule ends today," Kael said, his voice echoing clearly for all the pack leaders to hear. "Power vested in a single man leads to arrogance, blindness, and tragedy. I stand before this court not as your king, but as a warrior seeking to serve the peace we almost destroyed." He turned his gaze directly onto Isolde, his eyes soft with a profound, unyielding devotion that required no magical bond to prove. "I do not ask you to forget the blood on the marble floor, Isolde," Kael said quietly, taking a step closer to her. "I do not ask you to pretend the whip did not mark your flesh, or that my blindness did not cause you unspeakable pain. I only ask for the privilege to earn your trust, one day at a time, for as long as I draw breath." The hall was dead silent. Every noble and warrior watched Isolde, waiting for her judgment. Isolde looked at the crown sitting on the table, then looked down at the man who had traveled into the heart of darkness, stripped himself of his power, and bled out in the mountain snow to give her a future. She stepped down from the dais, stopping directly in front of him. "I will never forget the past, Kael," Isolde said softly, her voice carrying a strength that resonated through the vast hall. "The scars we bear are part of who we are, but I will not let the darkness of yesterday define the promise of tomorrow." She reached out, her fingers gently weaving into his. Kael let out a shaky, breathless sigh, his fingers closing tightly around hers as if holding on to the most precious gift in the world. "We will rebuild this realm together," Isolde continued, looking out at the gathered council of pack leaders. "Not as master and servant, not as ruler and subject, but as equal partners, bound not by fear or forced mating bonds, but by choice, honor, and truth." A roar of approval erupted from the Bloodfang warriors at the back of the hall, quickly joined by the cheers of the Obsidian guards and nobles. Outside the high stained glass windows of the citadel, the cold winter clouds parted. allowing the brilliant, warm light of a golden dawn to spill across the ancient marble floors, illuminating a new era for the three realms. True love is not tested when the sun shines bright. It is forged in the deepest, darkest fires of betrayal, grief, and forgiveness. Isolde's journey shows us that true strength does not come from rank or magical power, but from the unwavering courage to stand for truth even when the world turns against you. And Kael's redemption reminds us that true leadership requires accountability, humility, and the willingness to sacrifice everything to right a devastating wrong. Thank you so much for joining us for this epic, emotional journey of betrayal, courage, and ultimate redemption. If Isolde's strength inspired you and Kael's transformation touched your heart, please hit that like button, leave a comment with your favorite moment, share this story with fellow fantasy lovers, and subscribe for more captivating tales.